We continue the conversation on the construct of race as well as elections, and this time from a psychological perspective with three members of TTAP, the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists. We have Dr. MERISHA SEEPERSAD, as well as Wendy Jeremie, as well as Deborah Lee RIVIEARS. Now, I want to start with you, please, Dr. SEEPERSAD, and because, as always, we want to get an update on what TTAP is doing. TTAP was very active and available during the start of the pandemic. What is the association's current state of work?
Well, we are still very active as we have our hotline available. Instead of being a 24-hour service, we now offer it from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. So we have an 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift and a 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift. So we are still getting all the calls coming in terms of those who are feeling anxious, lonely, isolated, financial concerns, and so forth.
And I know there was a broad range of numbers and individuals available. There was a first name basis. Okay, well, this number is Mark or this number is this other person. Is that still happening the same way?
Yes, it's still happening the same way, but we didn't sectionize it in terms of different regions. We have it across the board because in the first instance, we had it based on the East region, West, but we have it throughout. So if you are in Toko, you can call someone from anywhere.
Now, I know one of the things people were trying to find out even about other things like grants or other things that you weren't necessarily dealing with, so that the president told me that you were saying, okay, well, learning the information that so you could direct them to speak to the person that they were supposed to talk to. Is that still happening?
Yes, it's still happening. So if anyone calls for grants, we direct them to the necessary resources.
Now, the thing is though, Mrs. RIVIEARS, elections took place during the pandemic. What comes to mind about the psychology of elections?
Okay, well, what we have seen is that voters, persons in general, they act in accordance with their beliefs and their preferences. And these beliefs might come from different places. You will have the biases, the implicit biases that people would have, the social identity in terms of the groups that they would belong to. You would have the ideologies that they believe in, and then you would also have the family voting preferences. Because remember, persons do belong to a family, and while they belong to that family, they would have learned how that family, what they feel, what are their preferences, what ideologies they follow. And you would find persons, many times they would follow what exists within their family. In addition to that, they would also be affected by social identity. People want to belong. People belong to a group. They belong to something, to a community. So that feeling that you get, that feeling of self-worth, that feeling of self-esteem, it goes along with that group behavior. So you would see that coming out at that time where people would continue to do what they think they should be based on their identity, their practices, and of course their ideologies and the ideologies that they follow based on the different political parties.
And this idea of groupings brings the construct of race to mind. So you have the floor, TTAP President Jeremie.
Well, first of all, let me tell you what somebody said about race. A gentleman by the name of Pascal Boyer, he said that racism is a consequence of highly efficient economic strategies, enabling us to keep members of other groups in a lower status position with distinctly worse benefits. And I had an alternative view, is that racism does not have a genetic or evolutionary basis, but is primarily a psychological trait, more specifically, a psychological defense mechanism. And this is generated by feelings of anxiety and insecurity. Now, remember I said defense mechanism. We use that every day in our lives to brace ourselves and to protect ourselves against any feelings of anxiety, unpleasant events and things like that. And there we go right into insecurity, right? We said, I also correlated it with psychological ill health, insecurity. We're not self-confident, it's a lack of psychological integration and inner the security, self-confidence there. We don't feel self-confident. And if we don't, we affiliate ourselves with a group to feel better, that shares our identity, right? And then after that, because you see, it's something bigger than ourselves, the grouping, it's bigger than ourselves, and we share the same sort of causes of the group, and we want to, and then there's nothing wrong with that, because we want to have, you know, to share a religious group, a choir, a football club. We want to share in the sisterhood and brotherhood of it, right? So that's why we joined the group that Mrs. Lee Rivera spoke about. A group is a very important thing. But when we join the group now, it may lead us. Nothing is wrong with joining a group, but that may lead to another stage in the group, towards enmity, towards other groups. Because you find to strengthen your sense of identity now, you develop hostile feelings towards other groups. You see? And then, when you join now, the members of a group take away the step of withdrawing empathy now of other members, limiting their concerns and compassion to their fellows. They may treat people in their group very kindly, but members of other groups, they will be cruel and heartless toward.
And with that in mind, I want to bring the other two ladies in, well, all three of you ladies. So if you are joining a group to find a sense of identity, to be empowered as an individual, how do you start to regain that sense of empathy? Do we do it on a micro level as a person, or do we try to address it on a macro level in the form of an institution or a body? And this is I have the floor open to anyone.
Well, let me tell you what I feel about it. If you're talking about it with regard to racism, when we do that, we sort of look within ourselves first, right? To be able to, you talk about a group, you have to correct it in yourself first before we go out there. And also, we have to accept things like the discomfort that we feel with regard to, I'm talking about racism here. Because if we do not check ourselves and check all our internal psychological processes and feelings, we can't correct it. You see, I don't know what Deborah has to say about it.
Yeah, we must remember that there are positive emotions and there are negative emotions. Mm-hmm. So positive emotions such as enthusiasm and joy, people get that from joining groups and being part of a group. Mm-hmm. And you would see that at elections times when persons are, in the planning stages and going to the meetings and so on. But on the other end, there's negative emotions of anger and hostility, as Ms. Jeremie spoke about. And sometimes those feelings can bring about a lot of resentment and a lot of hate and a lot of actions towards people who do not support your ideology or what you believe in. So it has to be tackled. To look at your question, DK, you need to look at it individually, you need to look at it family-wise, you need to look at it community-wise. It can be done across the board.
Mm-hmm. Now I see you nodding, Dr. SEEPERSAD.
Yes, I agree with my colleagues. It's both on a micro level as well as a macro level, because in terms of, as a child, the family is the first agent of socialization. So if the family instills such negative behaviors towards a particular group, then that child will grow up with that particular ideology. But as an adult, you need to look inwardly to work on whatever factors, so you can agree to disagree.
All right, well, with that in mind, I hope we can agree to return after taking a break. Stay with us. We are talking about psychology of elections and race with members of TTAP. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking with members of the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists, Wendy, Jeremie, Deborah Lee Riviers, and Dr. MERISHA SEEPERSAD. Now, Dr. SEEPERSAD, you bowled off first over and you're going to do so in the second. Some people say it is easier to bend the tree while it's young. So how do we start to address these issues among the youth? And as a person who deals with the youth, how do you try to influence them, and youth who only have a fraction of time under your supervision?
Well, you could just instill, it's okay to have different points of views, and not because someone, like your friend, has a opposing view means that that person is wrong or you are correct. So it's important that we respect each other's beliefs and values. So just to keep talking to them repeatedly that it is okay to have opposing views. You may like something and doesn't necessarily mean that I may like it. So.
But it seems as though sometimes if you're not with me, we can't agree to disagree. So if you're not with me, you're totally against me. We're enemies. We're going to start things. We're going. So how do we?
But self-esteem, you deal with your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-confidence, and you build on that. So.
No, Deborah, you consider yourself a solution-driven individual, and you deal with people across the board in terms of children, adolescents, and adults. Is it the same approach across the board, or do you address each category differently?
Well, it may be different when you're looking at children and adolescents because, you know, they are still young and they're still learning. But what you also have to consider is that they do belong to a family. And as I said earlier, persons learn that initial everything in their family. Their family will teach them who they should like, how they should respect persons, who they should associate with, who they should identify with. So that is critical to address in a separate way as how you would address an adult, because children are still learning. And they, as you said, DK, you know, maybe you can bend the tree, but in bending the tree, you may have to bring in the parents or the adults who they live with, so they can also become a part of the discussion. So the children will now realize it's not just what this person is saying to me, the stranger, the psychologist, but it's something my family now sees differently. So it can be done on that basis.
No, Mr. Jeremie, I don't believe in silver bullets, so I'm not going to ask you how we fix this. But what are the first things that we start to work on to get the situation better?
With regard to what? Racism or children or what?
With regard to racism, but how it is we address that basically across the board.
Because racism is it's so sensitive, right? We have to be able, as I said before, turn within, examine our consciences, look at ourselves, and develop a curiosity about our inevitable and internal psychological processes. And our processes are how we think, how we perceive things, the memory, our language, our emotions and motivations. And rather than getting distracted with questions like, am I racist? The new scientific understanding of racism poses a different set of questions now. For example, what are my biases? How do they guide my behavior? And how might it be getting in the way of the person I want to be? That's how we start. We start to accept others who are different from us. We start to be curious about ourselves and sit with the discomfort we feel when we talk about things like racism. We have to educate ourselves, send persuasive messages that contain the unacceptability of racism. And this should reach us as individuals at the level so that we see our prejudices there. And then it should go out to the society at a different level where we can create, I say, racially tolerant norms, standards, and rules. You see, if we deny all of this, if we push it under the carpet, if we minimize that, and if we pretend it's somebody else's problem, then we would never grow. So we have to be able to accept somebody who is different to us, go and talk to somebody who is not from our who is from a different background, a different culture, and different color of skin, the thickness of one's hair and lips. All of those factors have to be put into this. You see? So that is where it starts, with ourselves, and then we can move it up. Because if we don't stick with the discomfort, if we want to be part of the solution. And part of the solution means that racism has to be looked at under all its complexities. So and it begins with us.
But in terms of starting that internal process, why is it so easy to trigger reactions and have people cleave to a color, a symbol, a party?
Because with respect to the color, we decided that is how we have categorized things. We put things in a race, you know, we say in this category that, but really there are no races, you know. There's only one human race. There are no races, there's one human race, you know, so that we have to, it's so easy. And if somebody You see, if we don't feel too good about ourselves as I go back, we're going to affiliate ourselves with a group. And the members, we're going to share the same ideology and strengthen ourselves as we feel. So that's why it is not an easy thing, because we all have our little prejudices that have to be seen about first. Deborah, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah.
You know.
You see, I think because we all have a basic need to belong, everyone must belong. So we have to belong to some group, we have to belong to something. And in that belonging, we will tend to conform sometimes to what that ideology is. What do they say? So you go along with, and some of the things that they think, some of their preferences, some of their choices could be looked upon as, a little biased, or they may not be respectful of others who are not like them. So it comes back to respecting the other. Because we tend to respect those who are like us, but what about the other or the others? Can we respect them who are not like us?
Well, ladies, do we look at saying, okay, well, we want to inspire people to be their best selves? Does that work as well as saying, okay, well, we're going to have punitive measures if these are lines that you cross? How do we address that?
I prefer the first. Persuasion. We have to let people see the better, what is better in this, what is the good in this for them. Persuasion, rather than put the punitive measures in place. If we have no choice, but let us work at it first, and then we have to resort to those measures. That's what I think.
Let's always look at the positive first. There's always a positive in everything. In all situations, there is a silver lining.
But I find it interesting, though, because there was someone who was saying, this is in the United States, it's interesting that we love so much, and it feels as though we're not loved in return. And when you look at it, and people say turn the other cheek, there are only so many cheeks you have.
We have lovely words to sweeten, it, but when we come down to it, it's not an easy process at all. We have to, if we really want it to work, we have to, because, we are wired to disengage with things, eh? We easily say, well, look, I'm not pursuing that. That's not my business. That's somebody else's problem. We're easy to do that. But if we really want to solve this problem, we have to stick with it, stick to the very end. We want to do our part to see we want to be part of the solution. We want to accept others. And it has to be an intentional process. We have to stick with it. We can't just let it go. We must stick with it.
All right, so we want to thank you all for sticking with it, ladies. Just before we go, though, please give us some contact information so that people can contact the association.
717-8827 is the association's number. And we have other numbers on the flyer as well.
All right.
So
thank you so much, Wendy Jeremie, Deborah Lee RIVIEARS, and MERISHA SEEPERSAD, and for being part of this discussion that needs to continue until we get it right. And on behalf of the entire news team, I'm DK Rosta. Thank you for joining us. Good night.